Welcome everyone to this presentation this evening just around the federal campaign for 2019. What we will discuss in this session this evening is essentially a very high level view of what it is we need to focus on as an organization in the coming 2 months and how that fits into what it is we need to do as an organization at a big picture level in the time that comes after that. So really this will be information that exists at a really high level, and once we all understand and are aligned on what's happening at this big picture level, it'll become a lot easier for us to progress with some of the tasks that will come out of it at more of a plan and tactical level further down the line. So the big picture view on all of this. So when it comes to strategy for us and for a lot of organizations is ultimately about making choices on what it is we're going to do and what it is we're not going to do. Now, for the purpose of our strategy for the federal campaign and the time that comes afterwards, I've used a framework that's very common out in the industry that uses 5 key questions that ultimately answer the main question of how do we win? Like, how do we, at whatever it is we set out to do, how do we win at it? Now, winning is not necessarily about, taking home the gold medal. Winning is about achieving the objectives that you set out to do. So there's a series of 5 questions that are interrelated. And these questions will then be linked into each other and they will feed back into each other so that over time, what it is we have as our strategy will evolve over time depending on how we play and how we win. Now, ultimately, the strategy at this high level will ultimately come down to plans and projects that happen at the, on the ground level. But understanding what it is we're doing at the big picture level will help us decide what plans and projects we do in a much more streamlined and efficient way. So here we see the main strategy laid out, and there's two time horizons mentioned here. There's Horizon 0, which is right in front of us. That's the next 2 months for the federal election. And then there's Horizon 1, which will be the 12 months that will come after the election. Now, it's important to look at these 2 time horizons in conjunction with each other, because there's no point in us doing things today that are going to hinder us tomorrow. And there's no point in us trying to do things tomorrow that aren't aligned with what it is we're doing today. So the first key question for a big picture strategy is what's our winning aspiration? And for this campaign, I've proposed our winning aspiration as positioning Flux as an increasingly viable option for mainstream voters. Now, inside that statement, there's a lot of information that can be unpacked. The first word that I'll draw your attention to is increasingly viable. So what that's about is us demonstrating to the public that we are, we're improving, we're growing, and we're going to become more and more viable for them. We may not be there yet, and that's okay, but we're increasing our viability with every single day and every single action that we take. And mainstream voters as well. That's key, because I think what we need to start doing now is bringing the Flux idea more into the mainstream. We have sat around the fringes to some extent, but there is an onus on us now to bring this into the mainstream. I've laid out some very high level information there about how it is we're going, what would this look like? And it's very basic stuff when you think about it. It's just enhance the awareness of Flux in general, but also recruit the next generation of the Flux team. And I think that will be a really important outcome of this federal election, because we get so much attention and we gather so much energy and enthusiasm from people during a campaign. One of our key outputs will be onboarding and keeping these people for, as we build and go further down the line. Now, I won't go into too much detail in the information in the where we'll play in terms of our geographies and demographics. That's pretty self-explanatory. What I will draw our attention to is our reinforcing activities. And these are essentially the things that we will do consistently that will bring about that will serve our purpose and that will bring about our outputs. And I've identified those 4 things as explain Flux. That's our main thing that we need to do. We need to explain what Flux is. We need to be onboarding members, activating volunteers, and executing projects. Now, the thing that I'll draw your attention to there is nowhere in our reinforcing activities for this federal election is develop and release the app. And because that's a task that will most likely be of more use to us in the next 12 months. Because at this moment in time, we can't guarantee that we will be able to develop, test, release the app and use it in a way that will actually gain us momentum in the federal election. So instead, we're going to focus on these 4 key activities. Now, our specific configuration, essentially what that means is what we're going to be doing externally for this campaign is pretty much just answering questions that people have about Flux and doing that, trying to do that in the most efficient way possible so that we can do that at scale, so that we can field hundreds of questions, ideally per day, from people. And people come away from that interaction with their questions answered. Because that's what we spend so much of our time doing during campaigns is people coming along going, okay, what is Flux? How does it work? Where can I get more information? And if we can streamline that process, we can free up our resources to do much more interesting and value-add activities. Internally, our focus will be on getting our processes right for onboarding new members, for communicating with our members and with anyone who's interacting with us, and formulating and really locking down our ability to define projects and execute projects. And it's that word of projects that will come up a lot as we move through this, because people will go, what about this idea? And I would say that idea is a project. Now we need to figure out how to turn that project into an executable plan that aligns with what it is we're doing at the macro level. So how this all fits together for the federal campaign. We have our purpose, and from our purpose will come our objectives. Our objectives will help identify the initiatives that we want to run with. And those initiatives then will be completed by defining a series of projects. We'll do our projects, and those projects will deliver outcomes. And then we'll measure those outcomes, and that will help us inform how it is we're performing. So we start with the purpose, and as you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen, it works its way down. And then when it gets to the bottom, like once we've completed projects and we measure the success of them, we feed that information back up through outcomes, projects, initiatives, and objectives, and it will help us redefine our strategy as we move forward. So starting with the purpose, positioning Flux as an increasingly viable option for mainstream voters. I've identified 5 key objectives for us to focus on during this campaign. And these are very high level, almost meta type descriptions or categories of tasks. The first is enhanced general awareness. And this is around increasing the visibility of the Flux brand and enhancing the understanding of IBDD in general. Now, there's a number of initiatives associated with that particular objective. The first initiative is simple messaging. And simple messaging will be about us doing some work up front to get things like an absolutely comprehensive, frequently asked questions compiled so that we can most likely address 80% of any question that we're ever asked by sending people to one document. If we do that right, we can offload all of that to one document, and that's something we'll put on the website. The second aspect of simple messaging is APP, accountability, participation, and progress. It's some simple words that we've come up with that I want us to try and use for this federal campaign to see what sort of traction and understanding we get from it. Now, you'll see there that simple messaging is an initiative, but it doesn't describe what it is we're going to do. As I said, from simple messaging will come a number of projects. Now, I'll just jump very quickly to the next slide so that you can see an example of the types of projects that would be associated with simple messaging. So from the top, APP messaging, we need a little project around formulating that core messaging strategy, and so that we end up with the clear, concise messaging that we can use across all of our mediums. And that will be a project unto itself. Upgrading and updating the website content with our new messaging, that will be a project unto itself. Generating and creating marketing personas so that we can identify who our various target demographics are and the sort of messaging that will work well for them in various sorts of split tests. That's a separate project unto itself. Creating original content, that'll be a project. Comprehensive, frequently asked questions, that will be a project. So you'll see inside every single initiative, there will be a number of projects, and each of those projects will be made up of a number of tasks. But the way we will get projects done is by assigning accountability to the outcome to specific people. And essentially the role that I'm going to take will be trying to ensure that people have removing blockers for people so that they can achieve the outcomes of the projects that they define. So just jumping back into initiatives very quickly, another initiative around enhancing awareness is an open book campaign. This session is an example of our open book strategy, where we will do our campaign in the open. We will open it up to the public, and we will show people how it is we do things. We will put our information online. We will explain to people and to our members how it is we're running our campaign, and that will be part of our building awareness. We'll be the political party that tells people what it is they're doing. And so there's a number of projects that will be associated with that. The third initiative under awareness is social media. And the key words that I've kind of called out here is organic and automated. Organic being that while, yes, we can buy attention on social media, we have the ability to generate really good organic views and organic spread and virality online. And we just need to put together a number of projects to do that. And like the guys in New South Wales during the recent campaign started thinking like that and started putting together little packages of work and content that could be, that will fit into that will help us generate organic traffic and organic traction. The other key aspect of the social media initiative is around automation, where we can do a lot more with less, just by investing time up front in figuring out what it is we want to do, defining what it is we want to track, measuring those outcomes, and just taking a much more methodical approach to how we approach our social media, and using a lot of the tools that are out there now. Like, there's various sorts of, automatic follow bots that will just help us boost things like help us activate Instagram and Snapchat and various other platforms just by implementing like fairly rudimentary automation processes. So you'll see that this is all still very high level. I have, as I said, kind of like stepped out some of the initial projects that we will look at. And in social media, the first one that I will say is, the first one that I'll draw attention to is the project of a social media lab, where the lab will be responsible for coming up with the things that we want to test and implement and try out with social media. And ultimately, the output of that project will be more efficiency, increased automation, and more organic engagement. But as you see, that's still a fairly vague task, a fairly vague project. But I've left them vague because this is where people will step into the campaign and go, okay, I see what it is, I see what this domain is, I understand the outputs that we're looking for in this. I will come up with my own way to work towards those outputs. And the role that I will take, again, will be ensuring that the social media team have what they need to work towards those outputs, that we have in place appropriate measures to determine if they're achieving their objectives in that regard, and just trying to, essentially get us to kick goals in each one of these areas. So that I've just kind of like stepped into initiatives there for a second. Now, I'll just bring us down further into the depth of it in terms of key performance indicators. And so for this campaign, we will be using KPIs to monitor what it is we're doing. And I've listed some of the high-level KPIs, and we will keep KPIs at a fairly high level, but it will ultimately be about how they're tracking. So for social media, it will be, what's our how is our organic reach improving? For general awareness, how many organic articles are being written about us and mentions are we getting in the media? Because if we're doing all of our other things right, we should be able to see it in these high-level metrics. We have the ultimate high-level metric of votes on election day there that will ultimately determine how we've done in terms of awareness, but we won't see that until after the election. But there will be another metric in there that will be projects completed and projects completed to outcomes. So that will just be us measuring for all of the projects and initiatives that people come up with, how many of them are actually being carried through to completion, and how many of them are actually achieving the outputs and outcomes that they set out to do at the start. And that's what we will be measuring. Now, I'll pull us back up to the high level, to the key objectives again. So we have enhanced general awareness, empower volunteers to action. This one will essentially be all about us refining our internal processes to make it as easy as possible for anybody who wants to get involved in the campaign to do so. And the initiative that I've called out there is one-click activation. And that is about, if somebody wants to get involved in the campaign, all it should take is one click. And after that one click, they should be presented with the means or the ways to get involved, either on, by going, I am now committed to being involved on polling day, or I am now committed to attend a local meeting, or I am now aware of joining a working group, or depending on the level of activity and involvement they want to have, we should be able to just open up the door, bring them inside, and present them with the options, and for them to be able to follow their own journey. But we need to reduce the barrier to entry to get people involved on tasks. And there will be a whole series of projects, well, a couple of projects associated with how we do that, that will essentially come out of the engagement working group, just about making things a little bit easier. Next initiative, PopUp Events. This is one of these things that anybody who wants to do something for Flux, as in going out there, promoting it in public, we should make it as easy as possible for them. And what that means is, us setting up some sort of process that goes, you want to set up a Flux stand or a Flux event somewhere. What do you need? You need flyers, you need information, and you need a t-shirt, for example. Here is the one form you need to fill out, and all of this stuff will either be sent to you or you'll be able to print it and have access to it. And you can go and spread the meme yourself. Go out there in your local area and go wild. And that just involves us equipping people with those tools up front so that we can have a pop-up Flux event ranging from a table at the local supermarket all the way through to an organized event where maybe 50 or 60 people could turn up. And that's, again, you'll see like that's still high level. There's a variety of ways that people can take that initiative and make it their own. And the way that people will do this is by this another initiative of project teams. I want us to develop the ability to spin up project teams of 3 people, for example, where 3 people who are aligned on doing a particular idea. For example, running a local Flux event at the local library. It'll take 3 of us, we'll come together. Okay, we have 3 volunteers. Now we have a plan, and that will deliver an outcome. And again, it's just about us giving people the framework and the information and the guidance that they need to feel confident enough to carry through a project, because we can't, like, where we get killed as an organization is trying to micromanage projects. We can't do it. We have to let people do this stuff in the wild, but we have to give people enough guidance and structure so that they can do this. And you'll see there's a number of KPIs associated with this that will tell us how we're performing in this regard. Ultimately, how many volunteers do we get activated? And by activated, I mean actually accountable for an outcome. Accountable for an outcome. What percentage of tasks get completed? And ultimately, our key KPI for the federal campaign is like, how many polling booths can we get covered on election day? So now, stepping back up into key objectives, boost active membership. This one's pretty straightforward. This is about getting our membership numbers up. And the 2 key things the 2 key initiatives I want us to focus on in this area are creating more engaging and insightful member communications. And this ties into, for example, the developing of the marketing personas, where we have a huge database of members. They're all very, very different people, but we're hitting them with the same communication. And we need to be a lot more sophisticated in how we use our own member database and the communications that we put out to them. And the same will, there's a lot of synergy here between this and enhancing our general awareness and the messaging that we'll use. Next initiative, donation drives. While one-off donations are good, I would like the main focus of this campaign for us to develop sustainable revenue. And so anybody who's willing to give us a one-off donation, we need to convert them to an ongoing contribution. And even if it's a case of we say to people, hey, you were willing to give us $100, that's great. But believe it or not, we'd actually prefer if you give us, $10 a month rather than $100 today. That's an example of it. And it's just for us to test whether we can convert people into sustainable revenue streams, because into the long term, that's something that we need for the organization. We can't be reliant on federal campaigns to just get some money in the door and then we spend it all and then we're like, okay, what are we going to do now? So you'll see a number of KPIs associated with all of this stuff. A lot of them are fairly self-explanatory. The one that I'll draw people's attention to is cost per member. So at the moment, it costs us money to get members. In that we run election campaigns, and after an election campaign, we get an increase in our membership numbers, but we spend money on campaigns and we end up with X number of candidates. Our cost for candidates is the cost of the campaign divided by the number of members that we get. And we need to start tracking that as a metric so that we can ensure that over time, we're bringing our cost per members down. Just going to check. Yeah, that all I think should make sense so far. Back up to objectives. Develop the candidate pipeline. So because we're operating on such a short lead time for this election, from a candidate perspective, our focus should be on developing candidates during this campaign, as opposed to necessarily running candidates for one campaign and then them being like burned out and off to the side. So this will step out a number of initiatives associated with identifying candidates for the long term over the next 2 to 3 years, expanding on our candidate training so that we can bring people on the journey and develop them as candidates, and also that candidates will take a special role in the campaign in being, responsible for delivering projects. And so there will be an accountability associated with being a candidate of, delivering projects and, really kind of leading from within the organization and demonstrating to other people what it takes for Flux to succeed. So a couple of high-level KPIs there, just around number of candidates that we'll get in the pipeline. And I want us ultimately to develop a candidate competence metric where people can essentially assess their own abilities against like an aspirational standard that we'll set, so that we can figure out for various people, okay, you're really strong in campaigning and going out there, meeting people and having those conversations, but you're not so strong when it comes to, understanding nuance of how legislation gets passed through Parliament. Okay, well, you can work on that and you can help other people with the aspects that you're strong at. But ultimately, for us to have some way of measuring all of our candidates so that we can develop them in the areas where they're potentially weak, because like this is the long, like we're in a long game, and our candidate, like people who are candidates today, will be politicians in the future, and we really need to ensure that the people that we're selecting and putting into these positions are aware of the ultimate responsibility that they will be carrying, and to take on that responsibility now, and to demonstrate to the organization and to the community at large that they're willing to get involved in this for the long term, to do the right thing by the community. So that's just a high level objective around developing candidates in general. And coming away from the election campaign, I would hope for us to have a stable of what I would call ambassadors, who will no longer be candidates per se because there's no election, but they will be ambassadors who can go out there and continue to speak about Flux and IBDD over the next couple of years. The final objective that I'll talk about today is codifying our processes. So for us to grow as an organization and for us to make progress into the future, we need to ensure that everything we do is sustainable and scalable. Like at the moment, we're surviving simply because we don't have to operate at scale. And all of our processes are, most of our processes aren't yet sustainable. They involve way too much user interaction and way too much time on all of our parts. And we need to ensure that anything we do, or any idea that we have to improve this, that we capture all of these ideas, and that we have essentially a list of improvement ideas that are exist there. Document. This is about any task that will ever be repeated, no matter what it is. We should be documenting it, because there will come a time a few years from now where we will want to export what we've done as a complete package of work, and we will want to hand over what Flux is and all of our work to group people potentially in another country or in another jurisdiction. And we need to start thinking about it now, like the small investment that we make along the way in documenting all of our processes will make it easier for us to onboard new people into the organization as well. So we will be tracking how many tasks that we document during this campaign. And the third aspect of codifying our processes is actually codifying and writing code for processes that we need to work at scale. So there's a load of things that we do at the moment that it's fine when we're dealing with 50 applications or a couple of hundred members, but we need to start thinking about how we're going to manage these processes when we're dealing with 1,000 requests or 10,000 questions. And so there will come during this campaign, we will identify a number of areas where there are things that should be automated and will require time and investment on automating them. And we will have the discussion around that, and we will look to prioritize codifying scalable processes over other things that, we'll say that aren't necessarily aligned with our key objectives. So that's it at a very high level. Now, in the next 2 slides, I have spelled out some of the various projects associated with these initiatives. And as I said, these projects are still very high level and vague, and the onus will be on people to fill these roles, take responsibility for delivering these outcomes, but ultimately doing the work in the way that they see fit. Like, we will be giving the responsibility to people and saying, okay, do you understand what it is we're doing here? Yes. Do you understand the outcome that we're working towards? Yes. Great, go do it. We'll track you along the way and help you when you run into roadblocks. So I won't start going into all of this on a line-by-line basis. I'll end this part of the presentation for now, and I'll open it up to questions from people. Okay, cool. So that's my spiel done. That's the big picture thing, essentially. Key objectives, a number of initiatives, and then projects, and people are free. We will take the projects, we will populate in a few more projects based on everyone's ideas and what people think needs to be done. And then once we have our projects, then we can turn that into a plan and just go do it and get things done. And we won't have to spend a huge amount of time reconfiguring our plan and kind of like changing directions 10 times during the campaign. We'll start on day 1 going, we're all clear on what it is we want to get out of this campaign. We're all clear on the various initiatives and the various projects, and the only ambiguity will be, okay, how am I personally going to deliver on the expectation that's put on me to deliver the outcome that we've all agreed on.